Thank you everybody for joining us. I see that quite a few of you have come in from the curatorial tour that Sandhini and Sabih gave. So you're quite familiar with what the premise of the show is, and we're kind of drawing this conversation from that. There are a lot of overlaps from that show, but also the three artists that are present here with Mariah, Sheba, and Anoli on the screen have a lot of different aspects of their practice that overlap each other's, so which will be something that we'll be talking about today. I'd like to thank Ishara Art Foundation and Sabih for putting this together, and Altakal Foundation. For someone like me and a lot of us, these people and these presentations have been very, very critical in galvanizing these conversations around
Sorry.
Around South Asian art and politics and what it means. A lot of the audience here doesn't really need to be introduced to those nuances, but I think it's important to talk about it in this context and how the work is shown here. And I always think about these tours and what they mean to us in the diaspora or those visiting from South Asia and those completely out of this sphere and what it means. So I think the point of this conversation today also would be that, Sheba and Mariah Anoli are not unknown artists at all by any means, but we'll be doing, kind of a small introduction. The format is such that instead of them just going into presentations, I am going to be positioning question each to all three, and they'll respond with some kind of work or whatever the reflections are, and we're going to talk back and forth. We're hoping this is not very informal, which is why I'm sitting right next to Antonia so she can take over when I talk. But we'd love for you to kind of also pitch into the conversation in the end when there's a Q&A if we have time for it. There are several things that this panel is going to be talking about. Let me just quickly go into these introductions. Sorry, I'm a bit drugged on painkillers today, so I need my notes to help me, even though... We'll start with Sheba, of course, that many of you are familiar with. She's an artist and a photographer and a writer and a teacher, and she's based in New Delhi in India. Some of her iconic works are from when she was documenting and participating in these feminist movements in the 80s. And along the way, along these last 40 years, the kind of work has changed in medium, in format, and how she engages with audiences. And with Mariah, who is a dear friend, and I've known her from NCA days, is also somebody who has a very multi-layered practice. She's an artist, writer, curator, and has a research-built practice, something that I can relate to. She spoke a little bit about her work at the show in relation to Lala Rukh, and those are some of the things that we'll be revisiting today. She's based between Sri Lanka and Pakistan, so I think a lot of those kind of conversations will happen also. Anoli, who you see on the screen and who we wish was sitting on this comfortable chair with us and is not. It's all right. We see you loud, big and clear. Is a painter, sculptor, and installation artist. She's based between Sri Lanka and, in between Colombo and New Delhi. So I kind of like how she's an amalgamation of both these cities, and I hope we can kind of pick up on those city overlaps as well. Anoli also has connection to feminist practices, and in the 90s when she was kind of part of the Sri Lankan feminist movement, but she's also co-founder of the Tirtha Art Collective, which is part of this triangle art networks that was happening with Khoj in India and Wasl in Pakistan, and it's a very interesting institution building, ground up, working with students and artists kind of a setup. So, as you can see, all three of them across generations have worked with ideas of political movements, social movements, working with gender, research around these topics of being activists themselves. What we're going to do is start with Mariah first, and I'm going to position a question to you, so it's a bit of a formal question, but and then you respond to it,
Sure.
and come to the others. So Mariah, you work in multiplicities, as I've introduced. You're a producer of your own work, but a lot of your time and energy as part of your work and as curator has been being equally involved in the legacy of your mentor and teacher and South Asian activist, Lala Rukh. And through this relationship and your own experiences, your advocacy for cancer patients and palliative care and Colombo has become a really important part, and has been funded through art activities that you've organized. So these are multiple different roles, and they seep into your practice as well. And I wonder how and if you draw boundaries, where the other ends and you begin, and how much of this kind of affects your idea of the collective and solitary production.
Thanks, Saira. Thank you for the invitation, Ishara Foundation, Sandhini, Sabih. It's a pleasure to be here. That's a really long question, but we can begin with the more recent advocacy work. So I've worked many years with Lala on the MA program. So I stopped being a student, became a colleague. Friendships remained. And my participation in the feminist movement, especially in Pakistan, has been much more passive. I was another number. I would go along, I would do what had to be done. It's something you live, not a badge or a banner you carry. However, when it came to cancer, I live in Sri Lanka, divide my time between Sri Lanka and elsewhere. And what I realized was that especially when women fall ill, the reason they don't get better or don't do as well on treatment is because they are worried about their children, especially their children. They worry about things like meals, tuition fee, uniform, could be anything. And that's when I thought, okay, I'm going to do something about this, because this is something which is not something where I can be a fly on the wall and I can just turn up for the protest and help, as and when needed. And which gave birth to a trust, which we were fortunate enough to form. It's called Cancer Fund Gaul. Why Gaul? Because that's where I live. However, it's not about providing emergency medical needs, because cancer treatments go into millions, right? However, what we can do is what we do, which is organize things like art therapy, music therapy, and the occasional putting money in the pocket for stopgap reasons. And how we fund for it, I just call any and everybody who I've worked with in the past. And by and large, not by and large, 100% artists have given me works. And I have one condition. I don't want things that are left over in the studio. So be specific about what we have. We give 100% proceeds for the work we do. So that's the kind of advocacy parallel. But I started on this journey. So, when I work with people, then I'm working with hospitals, I'm working with government, I'm working with customs people, how to get work into Sri Lanka and not pay any duty, and so on. So, those are different kinds of hats. That's not solitary. But when I'm in the studio, I think that's my time. And it's a quiet time. And I think said this before, it's a time for thinking. And because this is the opportunity to share aspects of practice which may be lesser known. So I've been somebody who's been diagnosed with cancer multiple times. And that brought to me, okay, so there's an existential aspect to all of this. But aside from the existential, it's a philosophical question, because you're told you're not well, but you feel extremely fine and well. So, so I became interested in the borderlands between things that are seen, not seen, and that sort of jumped into a whole journey. So I started, around 2008, 2009, making these drawings. And so they start with...
Himanshu with the images.
Okay. So, I was making shapes using, different parts of my arms, hands. And then I was just doing these sort of meditative drawings in terms of visualizing, which I imagined was happening. But while I was doing all of this, so these are a series of drawings called Infinite Spread, which was like a molecular, you could say, portrait of what was happening inside the body. if we go next, this one is portrait of the inside. And I was doing these really large drawings. I mean, this is 4 feet by 7, 9 feet, I think. And I started folding them, so they hung like in terms of folds where you can sort of peek inside.
Mariah, do you want the remote to go back and forth yourself? Would you prefer that? There's multiple.
No, it's all right. I can tell Sabih. That's a close-up. So these were sort of, in pencil on paper. You could go next. So some of the questions which I was having was, so as a cancer patient, you're always asked to fight, and I got tired of this language, which is so militaristic. It was all about fighting and survival, and all the treatments were sort of all indiscriminate. And then, the more you look, you realize even treatments like cancer, like chemotherapy for cancer, come out of, Agent Orange, which was used in World War II. Lots of people died. So you have technology here, but then the applications change. So on one hand, you kill people. On the other hand, you can use the same techniques to make people live longer. Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes, right? And so this is the paradox, as to how do you deal with this paradox. And then, you do feel, things like carpet bombing. I was like, this chemotherapy is like carpet bombing. Nobody knows what you're shooting at, but, you have to believe that you're shooting at something. So these are sort of, slightly close-up images of the drawings. And then I was, again, thinking of planes, So the folded paper planes are flights, the night sky. Again, these, stealth bombers, which just fly in the middle of the night, and they just shoot you. And these are 365, there's somebody being shot at any given point in time. And I was also thinking, Obama had become president of the United States, and he was given the Peace Prize, and I could not understand why, right? Because, he's also the drone ranger. So how do you keep shooting at people without, how is it mediated, right? Somebody in a basement following instructions. And, the Boat Night song is a sort of another iteration of those same things. How do you, enact such acts of violence, right? And what does it mean? That's, another set of drawings, the molecular warfare, again, take the shape of the plane and the stealth bombers. And, sometimes they become tapestries. So I was collecting images of different World War planes, and I thought I'm going to work, what's the Italian famous, who did the Boetti. So, very inspired by Boetti in that sense. So this is my piece called Cover. Again, did the drawing, worked with people, got it embroidered. So where it crosses between working together with multiple people or it becomes my time, there is a boundary, there is a separation, of course, but you keep thinking, you're working. So that is something that doesn't change. Sometimes they become books, collage books and drawings. And here again, this one is making, reworking, and breaking, where Bloody Nasreen meets Miss Marvel. Because Bloody Nasreen is another character. She's this incredible Pakistani superhero, she smokes and she goes all over the place. But if you look at the Miss Marvel version of, somebody else, and so that's Bloody Nasreen there. Again, looking at, so we can skip this. But using a lot of war-related found imagery and then doctoring it and creating moving image works, posters, etc. And then more recently, I guess that was not enough. right? I mean, what do you do when you keep talking about all these brutal, bloody, hopeless things that are happening? And then that brings to my participation in the Istanbul Biennial. So what I proposed for the biennial is to sort of do an intervention in a medicinal plants garden, and to build a water garden. So this is sort of us building. And I work with musicians in Istanbul, and Turkey has a long tradition of using music for healing. So it's a collaboration. Again, it's very long, but these are some images from the opening, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Maria. I think just in the interest of time, we'll be moving through the other, and then I'll come back to you, okay? We'll move to Anoli, who will be coming to us via the internet. Thank you. Anoli, like Maria and Sheba, you've been involved in feminist movements and also community building. And in the conversations that we were having before online, that, as well as your own work with history, mythology, new imaginaries, these are all things that are also kind of overlapping and extending your practice. But what really interests me, for a very personal reason, is your work with your mother as the leitmotif, as something that appears very regularly and is a deeply personal and singular kind of access point through which you make works, and something that we also saw at Ishara. And what you had said to us, that you wanted to respond to the question that Sandhini and Sabih had put forward, which I'm going to read out. So perhaps you respond to that. So the questions that, before this panel was set and Sabih had written was, what happens when residues from the past are reincarnated into the future? Where does the jurisdiction of the present end? And what is the future of the past? And then you said that you wanted to respond to that. So I'll let you go now.
Okay, so well, thank you very much, Foundation, for inviting me, and I'm so honored to be in this panel with you guys. And so it's an honor. Okay, so let me. Should I just go on to my talking about my work, or should I just say something about how my interventionist
Can you
came
see
out?
the presentation that's on right now? You can't see what we have on, but it's the one you sent. We're just going to be walking through that. And then
okay. So this is actually part of my one of my early works, a comfort zone, which again had a lot to do with my mother. So let me just then start with my the work that my mother, I did do with my mom. So even the work that is included in the show, the notations of time, was about backgrounding her. So I anyway, I frequently engage with topics of time, history, and memory right throughout my practice. And this particular work and most of the other works was inspired by my relationship with my mother. And for instance, because she's a constant present in my art, and inspired me to formulate my early thinking on space, body, memory, and so on, and also domesticity. And she has been my muse, my mentor, and gave me the foundation for my spiritual journey. She's also my relentless critique and basically my opposite. So we never agree on things, but the funny thing is, she always refuses to accept me as an artist, and pretends she never understands what I do. But nonetheless, she's very proud of my work. I know, because when she talks to her friends. And so this is the paradoxical space she creates and commands, and I'm fascinated with this space. And because it defies time. It's a space where time is suspended, a space where one kind of never gets old, because for a mother, the children are always they're babies. and it's a similar to me. It's similar for me because she's always. She still calls me baby, and she's always the mother's body that I would like to embrace. So my comfort zone, which you're seeing now, is about this space. This space is, of course, like I said, a contradictory space, because as much as it is a comfort zone, it's also a confining and a controlling space. The rebellions are many, and cathartic outbursts are frequent. So there's so much of contention within this space and of this space. So I find within such spaces, one's roles shift constantly without, seem setting boundaries. So even when I'm looking at myself, I see this shifting of roles and without, boundaries. Um, and the next one, I think it has the monumental dress, which I again, my mother, it is the mother's body I was looking at, because this body absorbs the topography of time and history of passing moments. So it's a body that remembers and keep memory. And so forgetting is not easy, therefore, for a memory keeper. I think forgetting is a nightmare. So my mother is 90 years old, and she is now losing her memory. So my interest in memory came also through this experience, plus the experience after we had in Sri Lanka, we had a nearly 30-year conflict, violent armed conflict. And so it ended, the violence part of it ended in 2009. And after that, people were so there was so much of erasure after that, because it's a way of coping. People want to forget. So most of the monuments were in the north were removed and by the government, and so there was so much of amnesia suddenly. So for me, this the Memory Keep exhibition I did in 2013 was based on these two things. One is my memory, looking at my mother losing memory, and I also think that women have this habit of keeping memory. They are the people um, who maintain the albums. I know my mother had a album. She's very meticulous about it, captioning and all that. So so I took that part and worked on that, as well as the public erasure, the erasure of collective memory, which happened because it also I was inspired on that of doing that, because there was this monument made by one of the artists, Jagat Veera Singh. It's called the Monument for the Innocents. It was done to remember a killing by the armed forces of a group of children. These are really instances where people take their personal revenges in times of conflict. So so it was sponsored by a particular government, and when the next government came, after the war ended, the conflict ended, they completely uh, 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 broke it down and made into some other a garden and a leisure place. So, and because people were so interested in um, forgetting at the after such a conflict ended. So it's a coping mechanism, but at the same time, it is also very political. So I think all that made me work on memory a lot. And in the I have then there's this memory keeper. I have put a slide on the blue cupboard, memory keeper blue cupboard, which I was looking at the woman's role as the memory keeper. Um, Inspiration for this came again from like I said, my mother's uh, album, which she keeps. Um, and what is the next slide would be?
Left behind her.
Oh, okay, okay. Left behind her. Yes. So I also feel, I'm living in Delhi most of the time, and my mother lives in Sri Lanka. So there's this, it's. I find the mother's body constantly grieves for a loss. It's for an anticipated loss of probably the tactile proximity of the children, or and this is much more prevalent now because people are moving from place to place, and migration happens for different reasons, and so I think people live in distance to with a lot of distance to families. So all my mother's children are out. We live in different continents, and although communication technology connects us visually much more than before, touting in one way proximity and collapsing time virtually, but can these visuals accompanying voices be compensated for the tactile experiences um, that take place in real time and real moments? And so this particular exhibit, this is a tapestry series called Left Behind Her, and my work in this Notation of Time exhibition uh, is about this, this trying to grapple with the anxieties of this gap in real time. So yeah, so my work overlaps, like my themes overlap so much. So do you want me to?
No,
I
I
don't
think
know.
that's a really wonderful introduction. I think that helps. We'll have to move to Sheba, and then we'll come back to you again for kind of further picking these apart.
Yeah,
I think some of the things that Anoli said, especially around amnesia and violence, are very interesting and kind of is a really great way to come to your work, because when Sheba and I were talking, she's like, "These questions are so broad. You have such a broad practice." And we're trying to stick within the kind of parameters of the panel, but it's really, really hard. But I think that what, like, simply just beginning, your work in the 80s documenting these feminist and social movements are very iconic. And I'm very curious to understand that journey from those black and white photographs to film and new media installation. And of course, there's a lot that's covered in it. But how you feel your relationship kind of has changed with documenting time and history and the constantly evolving chaos of the social structure around you.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody. I'm not going to spend more time because we're running tight. I started as a documentary photographer, and when could you just stop on the double image? Yeah. And from about 10 or 12 years of street work, where I was a protagonist in the movement, shouting slogans one moment, lifting the camera the next. So it was really recording the movement for ourselves from within. A number of very key questions began to become urgently troublesome. One was the nature of documentary practice, the claim to truth. The second was the power of representation. As a feminist, I believe feminism is a political philosophy that analyzes power structures. So what was happening in the power relationship between my sisters in the movement and my representation of them? What was happening there? And third, the kind of lie of objectivity that is presented by the documentary canon, as well as the essentializing idea of the portrait. So a number of questions about photography itself led me into a collaborative experiment with 7 fellow feminists from the Indian women's movement. This is 1991. And what we did together, I'm not going to go into great detail, was basically collaboratively create a kind of mise en scène, a theatrical place where she chose objects, posture, which she felt would tell her story. My knowledge of these women was far more complex than the early images presenting, and I wanted that complexity and the nuance of these lives to come through. So from that first image you saw of Shah Jahan Appa holding up her daughter's photograph who was murdered for dowry, and then you see her listening to other women. She became somebody who was a supporter, opened a small center which would assist other women in crisis, to the staged portrait. Here you have the sewing machine, which was critical to her journey. That little kind of hut, she said, for those who understand Hindi, Meri kahani jhukki jhompdi ki kahani hai. So she made this little hut out of a cardboard box, but with a tinsel roof. And she said, this has to be here. And the burqa. She said, I cannot, it's part of my story, but I do not wear it in that way anymore. Neither can I leave it out. So I hold it here. So you have the setup, and also included are photographs taken of Appa over 10 years. Next, please. So the portrait, and here I'm arguing against this idea of the single essentializing portrait, which says that this decisive moment tells you who this person is. In fact, it is a series of moments, consequential or across a stretch of time, that for me create a mosaic of images which begin to be like pegs on which you can weave a story. There are 7 such portraits, and for me this was also about building time into the image. From the documentary street image, you came to an image which built the time both of the story, through the objects, through the staging, as well as the mosaic maps a historical period of time. I was also very interested in altering the kind of, I found that people looked at photographs too quickly. They moved past. You know, I think of it as the gallery walk, where people move quite swiftly and they think they've got it, they've got it, they've got it. Essentially, they got information. And I really wanted to, quite simply, slow them down. So one of the things, I wanted to reinvest the viewing of photographic images with time. So one of the first things I did was to take the photograph into space, off the wall, which creates a different kind of relationship. I'm not going into the photo-based installations, but I'm going into a device that I developed some time later, which began to fascinate me, because in this time that we're inundated with the photographic image and the video image, I got very interested in pre-cinematic devices, where the simple thing of, next please, the mechanical movement of a still image produces an illusion of movement. Stop here, please. So this is an animated light box. These create palimpsests. And if you go back one, please. This is a detail, but it gives you, it's quite a large light box. And it's mapped onto a satellite image of Delhi, where you have insertions which speak of an earlier pre-modern relationship to the city through the cows, which are drawn from pre-modern painting practices, the Naga Kanyas, which come out of poisoned water, and these figures, who are both mutants. They are altered, they are in Shalab Aslan, which is the locust pose, and the time of the locusts is a time of destruction. There have been, in China particularly, this is used as a term to refer to ecological destruction, the destruction of the fields. So these figures move very slowly across this sort of constituted landscape. It's like a digital tapestry. And as the figure meets the ground, they meet the ground differently. So it alters the relationship with the ground. It's very interesting because people come in. I like to watch bodies when people look at work. So they come in and, you know, they're carrying the bustle. And then they say, is it a video? No, it's not quite a video. And then they slow down. So they begin to offer a kind of attention that I'm interested in. And this interregnum, this in-between kind of device, creates that possibility. It's a loop. The images repeat, though each time it's new because it meets the ground differently, but I find people actually staying, spending time. This became a kind of device that grew more complex, more layers to the palimpsest. What I'm doing here is something that's become very important to me, which is constellating multiple temporalities, the pre-modern, the contemporary, the futuristic, together. My understanding of time argues against, like Sandhini so beautifully said in the morning, linear time. I think if we would take a slice through this very moment, we would find layers like geological or archaeological strata, and we would find many, many forms of time that inform this very moment. The mythic, the historical, the beyond time, etc. Next, please. These are details. There are many, many figures inserted into this landscape. But yeah, no, so I'm moving fast because I know we're running. I hope I'm not going too fast. Is it all right? Okay, so stop here, please. So I'm taking you now into just one artwork. I'm like skipping 20 years of practice. But just to give you a feeling of what this idea of this exquisitely nuanced exhibition that Sandhini and Sabih have put together, these reflections on time and connecting that to my practice, because this has been a mode of inquiry for me for a considerable length of time. So The Water Diviner is a large public art project. Let me also just say as an aside that I'm particularly committed to public art projects, to opening conversations. I'm very interested in the viewer. There are many artists who are not necessarily. I really am. I mean, I'm hungry. I hang around asking, so what did you think? So this was a serendipitous discovery of this extraordinary space under the Delhi Public Library. It sits in the middle of an extremely busy, crowded thoroughfare. And through research, under the public library was a defunct colonial swimming pool, which was piled high with rubbish, old fans, rotting mattresses, remaindered books, that is, books that are going to be pulped, etc. It's in a huge space, 60 feet and sliding downwards. It took me 6 months to get permission to enter the space, so I worked essentially within my own brain and imagination, and extraordinary historical research started just coming my way. So that busy thoroughfare that we had come off was once a waterway. And I discovered these amazing maps of water bodies and water paths exactly on the site. We're actually close to the Yamuna, and this work is very much about the river that has been turned into a drain. She's so toxic. You know, in mythology, the Yamuna was always black and Ganga was white. Today, they're both black. So as you enter, you encounter this lion's head, which is coming out of the wall. It's a sort of fountain, which I got going again, and I ran black water from the mouth. And as you move down, please continue, it's like they're cascading crags and, I treated the book, please stop, bundles of books as a kind of sculptural object, creating this immersive environment. You yourself have become blue, you're destabilized, you're in a kind of odd relationship even to yourself. The title of the work is about the divining rod that is used by people seeking water under the earth. So I think of the whole artwork as that kind of divining rod, teasing out the subterranean histories and memories of water in the city, in the heart of the city. Inserted amongst these books are what I called illuminated books. It's my little cheekiness with illuminated manuscripts. And these, please stop here for a moment. These actually, go back. Yeah, stop here, please. These actually bring together, again, pre-modern stories, myths about the Yamuna, drawn mainly from the Krishna mythological body of stories and Purans, along with contemporary images. I use again the satellite image of where the Yamuna leaves her source in the Himalayas, and it marks the dams. There are 32 dams on the way before she reaches Delhi, and another 30 are planned. So the natural rejuvenating of the river just doesn't get a chance because the water is siphoned off along the way. Above that, you see Balaram. Now, I have to tell you the story. Will you allow me that indulgence? So Balaram is Krishna's brother. He's a farmer. Krishna is a cowherd. The difference is important. One day, he's had a bit to drink, and he's hot. So he yells out to Yamuna. Now, Yamuna is Krishna's lover. So he yells out to the goddess, the river, whose body is the river, and says, "Come and cool me down." And she's a bit offended. She's a goddess. She says, "Why don't you come here and bathe?" And he reaches out with his plow, which you see, and begins to drag the river towards him. And there is a long text about the conversation between them. But the image is of a man dragging a woman by her hair. And she begins to split into tiny rivulets. And she realizes that her power to nurture and her power as a river and as a goddess would be dissipated. So she finally acquiesces and comes and floods the grove where he's sitting. Could this be the first dam in history, in mythological time? So each of these books, and there are many of them, tell different kinds of stories and different kinds of juxtapositions. Next, please. This has this extraordinary map pieced together by German scholars of the water bodies. And again, you have the toxic Yamuna, where people now basically go to the river for key rites of birth and of death. The white effluent, and then as you come down, sorry, it's going fast. As you come down, you encounter right at the end this video. Next, please. And I'll just let the video play for you because I think it says, without me saying too much, many things about time, ecology, retrieval, destruction, recreation. We'll stop here. The elephant reforms in an endless loop.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful, all three of you. I think the diversity of these practices kind of sums up my conundrum at how do we talk about something like, something like notations of time. Obviously, all of you are dealing with it in kind of very multiple ways, whether it's cross-generational, whether it's between day and night, whether it's historical and mythical, or whether it's drawing new kind of frameworks for all three of you. And I think, I had so many different questions, but I think what I'll do is address just a couple more and see if we have time to open to the audience. But Maria, something that was really interesting to me was when, obviously your practice that we talked about, this idea of time and slowness is something that, is something we talk about in South Asian practices a lot, and about this kind of intergenerational learning that we have is not really ascribed to this kind of forms of linearity. You've talked a lot about role models and how those have been a part of your practice. Lala, introducing you to things that you didn't know, you jumped head in, and then you learned about it later. And I wonder if that is something that you feel is the same way of learning that you, when you're teaching, you're passing on that concept. Because now one of the conversations that we had earlier online, all of us together, was people are accessing information and this kind of mob, whether it's mob violence or mob anger or, politics, they're accessing to very different points. And do you kind of see that in your practices as forwarding this to your students or people you're working with or communities you're working with? The idea of creating this non-linear passing on of information through intergenerational art making or conversations or teaching.
For me, I've never thought of time in a linear sense. So, I find the assumption that time is linear quite perplexing to begin with, right? Because it's never, so to sort of, so I'm not doing something which is a given and doing something sideways to that. For me, it never existed in a sort of, and I think the World Wide Web is a classic example of a multiplicity of point of view, time, and chaos, right? So in terms of learning through quick access of information, again, it's more misinformation, right? So to know something, you need to be guided. It sounds rather old-fashioned, but to even know what you're reading, right? Just to be able to read or to understand the meanings of those words does not necessarily mean knowing, right? And so that's where those lines are drawn. How do you know something? And I think that's what artists do. It's just not the representation of here, this is what happened, right? What journalism does is what journalism does, and they do it really well. That's good journalism. But how it gets mediated through somebody's thought and deliberation and how you communicate that, whether it's through exhibition making, whether it is how you bring and discuss something with your students, or how you stand in front of artwork, right? And as a teacher or as a curator, whichever hat you're wearing at that particular point of time, is a completely different experience. Does that answer?
Yeah, but I'm also wondering, is this notion of illness, what it does for your understanding of time, whether it's, the urgency of something, because those are things that you have brought up before when we've spoken about Lala as well.
Yes. So, so while I was ill, Lala was really important in my journey to get better. I'm sad that I couldn't do the same for her. But what a certain kind of illness also does, or when you're confronted by bombs or whatever, it's existential. You don't know what the next week might be like or the day might be like, right? We are surrounded by this sort of insecurity. So you can either focus on something like, oh my God, this is my timeline and it's going to be death or whatever, but I think that's everybody's timeline. But specifically to me, what illness does is it's a celebration of every second and how valuable that is, right? I mean, you talk about, I've done a lot of reading, looking at ancient books of Ayurveda. And one of the key teachings is that the world is recreated every second and you can manifest that, right? And that's what your power is. And I think that's the power of art. To be able to manifest your own reality is the way you want it to be.
That's so poetic. I just got goosebumps. That's quite beautiful.
In Buddhism, you have a meditation which is considered a basic meditation, because the only things that are true are birth and death. If you're born, you will die. And so the meditation is on death, where you actually visualize through all the elements of the physical, material body, your death. And what it does is make each moment so precious. So exactly what Maria just said.
I think something that Anoli said when we were kind of all talking, when we were emailing each other back and forth, and it really stood out, was she's like, I'm not a radical or an outspoken person. I don't find comfort in speaking about my work or or putting it into words. But I mean, I think, Anoli, when we're coming back to you, we've all discovered that we're dealing with some kind of, whether it's illness or whether it's loss of memory, personal or with a family member. You were involved with very radical kind of feminist movement in the 90s. And to be a non-radical person, I feel like it's interesting how you moved domesticity to kind of talk about those things. But I'm interested in hearing a little bit about the 90s and the radical movement and how that kind of permeated into your practice and how you were very pivotal in giving back to that movement.
Yeah, yes, right, you're right. I'm not a person. I've never thought of myself as a person who's a radical person. But I guess that the time is very important. Time moves people to do things that you don't really do otherwise. The 90s was a time that things were changing. Especially in South Asia, I think. We were all experiencing chaos and lot of conflicts, and I think 90s was a time of change, and I think my intervention is and the activist tendencies came about in this period as a way of in one way is to rebel against the rejection of our work and some of our work which had more critical and contemporary narratives and different formats, the performance art, installation, all that came. And so it was not exactly something that was accepted. And this and the 90s group that I was involved with, they were radical about changing the way we thought about art and everything. The aesthetics, they became harsh, and the way of making became very multimedia, installation, performance, and all that. So they are very and also the thematics, as that's we people started talking about the contemporary, what is really affecting you. So in a way the artist became a critical being rather than a passive one. So it, it I was caught up in this particular mood and the ideology of the 90s art movement, and so this brought my interventionist energy out. And then the collectivism at that time was high. People want to get into groups, so because you always thought you're more powerful than being a single voice. So, and Tirtha, which is a collective again founded by 11 artists including me, and in the 2000, and I ran it for 17 years. And it was, I also have to mention, other 10 artists were male and I was the only female. And it was not that, I used to call it a girls' club, but of course I had to, I did the programming. I basically ran it. So I, it was a constant negotiation of things and, fighting for, even within the group, fighting for my space. And but it also allowed me to put in place programs that would support women artists and also support them in their practices, because women artists, young graduates are very vulnerable. They lot of at one point there were like more than 50% of the students were female in the art college, and but when they really graduate they just disappear. So because it's very crucial to give that first period, first year or so for them to stabilize their practice. So this is there were a lot of work done with women artists, and also then other than that there were a lot of other things that we did in the conflict, because there was as I said before, there's a 30-year war going on in the north, and there were lot of anxiety about that, and uh, connecting with that part of the country was difficult. So, but through Tirtha, we managed to, you know, put together a network of artists through which we worked in areas like Jaffna, in the northeast, Batticaloa, where we, had constant workshops with art teacher training, because things like that were like almost non-existent, because teachers were not at all trained to teach art. So there were so many types of programs we did to support a lot of these artists and teachers and education and also the publication. So through this, I think this is where my intervention comes. So I think it was a very I think it expanded my practice, because within a group, within that Tirtha group, we also kind of matured. Our themes expanded, and we with the experience. So it had a lot of impact the way we look at art, and we did. So yeah, I'm sorry. What else? I
No, I
forget
think
what.
that was quite helpful. That was really wonderful, actually, and I think it will resonate with a lot of the artists who are in different countries and part of these collectives and organizations that are facing very similar challenges, especially with art schools. Where's Sabih? Is he hiding? Oh, there you are, Sabih. I think we're kind of at the edge of time, so we should open it up to if anybody. Oh, we see hands raising before I finish my sentence. Yeah.
So my question is very simple. Uh, your art practices are about women's rights and, championing women and bringing them forward, giving them opportunities. But I wonder, and this is something, I guess, from coming from a personal space as well, as an artist, how did the men in your lives respond or react to your art practices? And it's open to the panel.
Men can be feminists too. It's not about biology, it's about a political philosophy. So in the early years of the movement, we also had fellow travelers amongst men. The men in my life, they're not that many, oddly enough, have always been extremely supportive, especially once one was able to break through the stereotype of the bra-burning feminist who hates men. This is a media stereotype. It's not us. So I think it's also very much about conversation. because men suffer as much under patriarchy as women do. They have privileges under patriarchy, but they're also forced into certain kinds of subjectivities and a kind of subjecthood, where, for example, a man can't cry. You know, can you imagine not being able to cry? I mean, this is terrible. So it's about conversations. It's about understanding the structures of power that are determining through the prism of gender how we are, especially within both social and intimate relationships.
I don't need to add to that, do I? I think that's so well summed up. No, I mean, I've been very fortunate. There's no one I'm fighting. There's no man in my life that I'm sort of reacting to. And, you know, as rightly said, I think it's politics, right? It's politics. Patriarchy is a political construct of power. You know, it's about inequality, right? So you can begin with the first sort of inequality, could be gender, but it's about inequality in some. And how do you dismantle those systems? You know, the idea of a superiority as a male, you know, is just one amongst many.
I think I'm a much angrier person, and I would not have such.
I was just going to say
angry? I mean,
that
no
there's something
moment.
like political rage. So the women I grew very close to were part of Seven Lives in a Dream, the portrait work that I started with. Many of them are mothers whose daughters were murdered for dowry, brutal deaths with the collusion of the husband and the in-laws very often, and the police and the state. And that rage, that political rage, is very important. It also leads to change. So we were able to achieve certain changes in the law, certain mechanisms, however faulty, from the state, anti-dowry cells, etc., etc., etc. So I think rage, not in the, just in terms of, you know, not an adolescent kind of rage, but political rage is important and critical.
And I think that's the distinction to be made, right?
I also agree with both Sheba and Maria, because I sometimes feel that the many around me. I mean, I think it's also about women claiming their space. I know it's difficult sometimes, but it's just. I sometimes feel that even when there is a possibility to speak out, that the way you are socialized, you don't really go there, and sometimes it's comforting to be silent. So so these are issues that, like, that would I mean, as artists, you need to. I always tell the women artists, you have to first believe yourself as an artist, and you claim your space. I mean, that's important.
I mean, silence can be quite a loud tool, actually. Is there anybody else that would like to perhaps say something or ask something or not? Sabih, you are on call now. Would you like to perhaps help us wrap this up? And then, because I think we're done for time, so yeah.
She'd like to say something. Sandhini?
Put you on the spot.
I don't know. I think this has been a really, thank you very much, first of all, for being so honest with all of us and for being so revealing. I think that the private is inherently political. And I think that the political is inherently private. And these, they bleed into each other. And this project was not supposed to offer answers. This project was meant to just be a gathering place for many of us, and to look at extremely poignant practices that are very generative. I have an enormous respect for all these artists, and I have for many, many years, and I know Sabih shares that same inherent respect. But it was, this project was meant to be inherently philosophical, and just a way to open up one's horizons, and as Sheba said, you could really think of this moment as a certain slice. And I've experienced time like that my whole life. But I haven't found it in my curatorial practice. And I certainly haven't found it as a museum curator. And I have found the museological space extremely patriarchal, and extremely restrictive, and extremely linear. And so perhaps my need to participate in this project was also just a place for me to say certain things that I wanted to say. Through these incredible practices and through this incredible gathering, because we all keep adding to it. So that's all I wanted to say.
I think that's quite a wonderful note to end on. I think I'd like to thank, I would like to thank the three artists who were here. Anoli, I wish you were here in person. And to Sandhini and Sabih and Ishara Art Foundation. And thank you, everybody. Please feel free to come up to them and talk to them. They're very approachable women. Anoli you'll have to find online. But thank you, everybody.
And